Do you remember the time that you went away to camp and you could not talk to your parents or family for a week? Do you remember how you felt? The sadness from being taken away from your family, the anger at the camp counselors for not letting you go home or contact your family. Well, imagine being 4 or 5 years old and being taken from your family so that you'll be stripped away from your identity. Everything you are and everything you know is thrown out the window because you identify as Indigenous. Before residential schools became predominant in Indigenous culture, the Royal Proclamation of 1763 came into play. This proclamation established very strict protocols when dealing with Indigenous people. The Royal Proclamation declared that only the Crown could purchase land from Indigenous people. Between First Nations and the colonies, the Indian Department became the main point of contact. Residential schools were designed to take away Aboriginal culture and to educate Indigenous children in the same manner and on the same subjects as Canadian children. Additionally, 132 residential schools were created, and between 1857 and 1996, residential schools hosted 150,000 Indigenous children. The children that remained when they turned 16 years of age got to go home to their families if they were of no use anymore. In 1960, Indigenous people were given the right to vote in federal elections. Indigenous veterans were deprived of the right to vote. In the 1970s, new education policies were developed. These policies were designed by Indigenous people, and they incorporated modern curriculum respective Indigenous traditions and language cultures. In 1996, the final residential school closed in Saskatchewan. Following the closing of the residential school, stories surfaced regarding abuse and mistreatment of Indigenous children by school administrators and teachers. A man by the name of Phil Fontaine called on the government and the churches involved with residential schools. This was to get them to acknowledge and address the abuse and mistreatment. In the 1990s, churches offered apologies to the survivors. In 1998, the government acknowledged their part in the abuse and mistreatment. In 2007, the government announced a landmark compensation package, also known as the Common Experience Package. This was worth $2 billion. Included in this package was common experience payment, independent assessment process, commemoration activities, and so on. Everything that Indigenous children went through while in residential schools were passed down through generations and can still be continued on to this day. When settlers moved to Canada, they took control over the lives of Indigenous people and shipped the Indigenous people to different parts of the country. Colonization between Indigenous people and Canadians continues to make an impact to this day, because Europeans stripped Indigenous people of their land and culture.